Okay, so this is Jason Long here in Knoxville, Tennessee. I am welcoming everyone who's joined in for our 21st Century Lawyer discussion this afternoon on The Other Fellow May Be Right, the importance of civility and the practice of law. I need to give a few commercial announcements before we get started. One, if you're joining in, you should have access to the chat room. Please submit all questions that you may have for our speaker to the chat room. We'll be sure, hopefully, to save some time towards the end of the discussion to address some of those questions. Also, we've got an upcoming seminar, November 19th, with the ABA president, Judy Perry Martinez. We will be discussing state and local bar leaders, responses and events they can plan for the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. Now, let me introduce you to our speaker today, because I'm very excited to have him with us. Bill Halton is former president of the Tennessee Bar Association, former president of the Memphis Bar Association, I believe, as well. Correct, Bill?
That's correct.
He is a recently retired attorney with the law firm of Lewis Thomason in Memphis, Tennessee. He has served previously as the chair of the editorial board for the ABA Journal. He has single-handedly revived the tradition of wearing seersucker in Tennessee as he tours the state.
But
He is
not
an
today
accomplished
because it's
author.
2 weeks out of season.
I'm sorry, Bill?
Not today because it's 2 weeks out of season.
That's true. We're past seersucker season. He's an accomplished author, having written 6 books now. One of them we'll be talking about today. His most recent one, Full Court Press, was about Title IX and women's basketball in Tennessee. He's got one coming, he tells me, in December, Why Can't Mother Vote? It's the story of Joe Hanover, the Memphis lawyer who helped lead the fight for the passage of the 19th Amendment in the state of Tennessee. I can vouch for the readability and the accessibility of his books. My 11-year-old son was enthralled by the book that we're going to talk about today. And even at age 11, it still resonated with me at age 48. So I highly recommend, if you haven't read any of Bill's books, that you take the opportunity to do so. They're available on Amazon.com. Today, we're here to talk about The Other Fellow May Be Right. You see it on your screen. The Civility of Howard Baker. Bill has put together a history, a biography of the famous senator from Tennessee, Howard Baker, his approach to civility, both in the practice of law and in his profession as a senator for our state. Howard Baker was a legendary figure here in the state, and his approach is unique compared to today's approach to politics. And so Bill has put together a program based upon the importance of civility. And so I'm going to turn it over to Bill right now. And like I said, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Bill, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jason. And I am delighted to be with you today to discuss what I really believe is the most important issue facing our legal profession today. And I don't think it is an overstatement, if anything, an understatement to say it may be the most important issue facing our nation today. That's not simply the decline in civility. It's an absolute implosion of civility. And the implications for the implosion of civility in our society are serious toward our profession, a profession in which I'm going to say today, although it's a contentious profession, by definition, has to have civility in order to function. And it has serious consequences for our entire nation, because a democratic society, particularly a nation such as America, in which it's not about, it's e pluribus unum, it's about being different. It's about different groups, different perspectives that come in with a system of checks and balances and respect, that the implosion of civility in this country has serious consequences for our legal profession, our judicial system, the ability of our system to work, and for our overall democracy to work as well. I'm going to talk today in particular as well about the role of lawyers in civility. We lawyers are leaders in our society. As I've often said, no matter what institution you find, whether it's your local civic club, whether it's your city council, whether it's your legislature, whether it's your boardrooms, that lawyers are always leaders in those contexts. And we have, I submit, an obligation to help reverse the course of incivility in our society, in our profession, and in the overall society. I'm also going to be very practical in the discussion today, because I'm not only going to talk to you about the fact that I believe civility is an ethical obligation. I'm not only going to talk to you about the fact that the importance of civility in order for our system to work, but one of the things I'm going to talk about is how really good lawyers practice civility. Really good lawyers practice what I call strategic civility. That is a civility that's not just being nice to your adversary, not just being respectful, not just being respectful in front of judges and juries and in mediations and in conference rooms because it's the right thing to do, but because it is the very smart thing to do. I'm going to be talking a lot today about a great Tennessee lawyer who I think is an exemplar of civility. He's on the book cover that you see on the front here, and that is a great Tennessee lawyer who passed away just a few years ago. His name was Howard Baker. Now, if you're as old as I am, if you're in your 60s, you'll remember Howard Baker. You'll remember him for a particular historic moment in the 1970s during the Watergate crisis, when he was the ranking Republican on the Watergate committee investigating alleged indiscretions, if not even crimes, by the Nixon administration. Howard Baker is remembered for a question he asked, a compound question. I guess it would be objectionable in a court of law. A compound question he asked during the Watergate hearings. He asked the question, what did the president know and when did he know it? It was the two fundamental questions about the Watergate scandal and ultimately led to the resignation of President Nixon. What's interesting about this story is that Howard Baker loved Richard Nixon. Howard Baker was a committed Republican. Howard Baker believed in the innocence of Richard Nixon, even when he asked that question. And as I describe in the book, believed in the innocence of Howard Baker the innocence of Richard Nixon until the infamous Watergate tapes came out, indicating that maybe Richard Nixon was not innocent after all, maybe lied about what had happened. But that's just the background of this. But today we'll be talking about him more as a lawyer, as an incredible lawyer who for 19 years before ever running for public office, tried over 60 capital case trials. He once said that even though in his lifetime he had been a senator, had been majority leader of the United States Senate, had been Ronald Reagan's chief of staff, had been ambassador to Japan, that nothing was more rewarding to him in life than trying a jury case, trying a case before a jury in a capital case. He said it was the most exhilarating thing he ever experienced in his life. As I'm going to tell you today, he was very, very good at it. But before we talk about him as an exemplar of how you and I as lawyers can conduct ourselves, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it is a winning strategy in terms of representing our clients. Let's put everything into a context here at the beginning. And that context is, and Teresa, I'm hitting this shift and it's not shifting for me. I'm trying to go to the next picture. Here we go. I want to talk about the fact that, quite frankly, we are living in, and we all know it, very uncivil times. We have a president of the United States who begins each day, it seems like, doing a tweet storm in which he basically sends out insults. He basically insults his political opponents. He doesn't just say that they're necessarily wrong, just having a different point of view, a different approach, but he questions their patriotism, sometimes questions their faith. Very uncivil in that approach. He also engages in taunts and name-calling that I haven't seen since I was on the playground at Fraser Elementary School in the 6th grade back in the 1960s. Now again, I don't want to do any false equivalency here, but it's not just, of course, the current president of the United States. His opponent in the 2016 election, Hillary Rodham Clinton, unfortunately made the statement that most of her opponents were part of, most of people supporting President Trump were part of a basket of deplorables. She unfortunately recently said that there would not be time for civility in this country again until the opponents had been defeated. Now, I'm not just talking about Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Let's be very honest about this, and honest and candid about this. This decline of civility in our nation has been building for years and years and years. The politicians, more often than not, don't set the culture, they don't set the times, they reflect the culture, and they reflect the times. I want to tell you about a story about a project, an unsuccessful project of years ago called the Civility Project. The Civility Project was created by two very different people who were very, very close friends. The Civility Project was created by Mark DeMoss, a Republican, an evangelical Christian, who had been an aide to Moral Majority Leader Reverend Jerry Falwell. And his friend who helped him create the Civility Project was Lanny J. Davis, a Democrat who had been an advisor to President Clinton. Now, Mark DeMoss obviously was and is very, very, very conservative in his viewpoints. But he regarded Lanny Davis then and now as his best friend. And Lanny Davis was an unapologetic, say it loud, say it proud liberal. They often had dinner together in Washington, drinks together, enjoyed each other's company, but they both expressed a great alarm for the decline of civility. And this was almost a decade ago. It was over a decade ago. It was in 2009. So they came up with this great idea. They called it the Civility Project. It was very simple. They came up with a civility pledge. And the pledge was very simple, and this is what it said. It was just 3 lines that we lawyers can take to heart. I will be civil in my public discourse and behavior. I will be respectful of others, whether or not I agree with them. I will stand against incivility when I see it. That was the entire civility pledge. They then took that pledge, had it typed up, and had it sent to 585 people. Those 585 people were every member of the United States Congress, all members of the House of Representatives, United States Senators, and the governors of all 50 states. And they sent a letter saying, would you please sign this pledge and send this pledge back to us? And when we get the names of the people for the pledges, we're going to take out newspaper ads across the country to announce the names of the people who have signed the pledge. 585 letters went out. Only 3 people who received the letter signed the pledge. They were Joseph Lieberman, independent of Connecticut, Representative Frank Wolf, a Republican of Virginia, and Representative Sue Meyer, a Republican of North Carolina. In fact, even worse, they were criticized. They were criticized by a number of commentators about what they had said. One commentator on Fox News said that this was unilateral disarmament. To sign this pledge was unilateral disarmament. So the Civility Pledge, the Civility Project died. So it's not something new. It's been building up over a decade. And it's not just about politics. It's also about our profession. Let's be very candid. Although most of the colleagues that I had in 40 years of law practice were very civil, even when we fought in court, even when we had disagreements, we see increasingly uncivil people in our profession. We see increasingly the so-called SOB litigators who think that they need to put on a show for their clients. I began to see in the latter years of my career something that was very disturbing, and what I call the strategic use of alleged ethics violations. You particularly see it, unfortunately, in domestic cases. And what you see is lawyers standing up in court in a dispute, a civil dispute, maybe over discovery, maybe over production, something like that. And what they say about their opponent is not that they're, as a matter of law, wrong, but they accuse them of ethical violations, that they are intentionally withholding evidence. They are intentionally disregarding the rules of procedure. And you know, when they do that, interestingly enough, we're not even in the right forum for that. All states have boards of professional responsibility, and that's where those complaints need to go. But increasingly in our profession, we are seeing people making ethical charges without even taking the charge to an ethics board, which, by the way, you know, is an ethics violation in and of itself. If you claim somebody has committed an ethics violation, but you don't report them in any fashion, but that's an increasing issue. And I'm afraid that for whatever reason, and I can't explain what the reason is. I don't know if it's a lack of mentoring or whatever. Maybe it's the culture. Maybe it's reflected in the movies. Maybe it's reflected in the Grisham novels. But the perception seems to be increasingly in our profession that, you know, if you're a civil litigator, no pun intended, I guess a pun intended, if you're actually civil in your approaches on this, that you're just not a very good lawyer. You are a weak lawyer. And I'm going to tell you in a few minutes why I think that is an absolute, not only a misperception, it is absolutely incorrect. I don't know if you recognize this guy. Any of you are baseball fans, so you got to be an older baseball fan like me. This is Leo DeRocher. Leo DeRocher was not a lawyer. Leo DeRocher was a famous baseball player. He was the manager of the Chicago Cubs, who are now just 2 games behind my Cardinals in the division race. Leo DeRocher was famous for a line that he liked to use. He said, quote, "Nice guys finish last." That was what Leo DeRocher thought about baseball. Nice guys, you see, they don't win, they finish last. And I would submit to you that increasingly in our profession, increasingly in our entire culture, the perception seems to have become that nice guys finish last. That if you don't thump your chest, if you don't say, "I'm right," and not only are you wrong, but you're not only wrong, you're really a bad person to suggest something else. You're not pursuing justice like I am. You don't love our country like I do. You're not just somebody with a different point of view. You are somebody who is dangerous, somebody we have to stop. That is the perception. That's the perception, that civility is weakness. Civility is not strength. But let me talk to you why I think that is directly wrong, and why I hope to persuade you during our hour that as lawyers, really lawyers that practice what I call not just civility, but strategic civility, are very, very, very successful. They're the best lawyers we know. The lawyers that over the years I have tried to be, and the type of lawyer I've tried to be, and the lawyers I've tried to emulate over the years. You know, I practiced law for 40 years, and like most blessed lawyers early in my career, I had mentors. I had 2 or 3 lawyers who I would be co-counsel to at trials. And I watched them try cases, and they were tough litigators, tough fighters. But they practiced strategic civility. They got along with their adversaries, and by getting along, I don't mean they agreed with them. They more often than not disagreed with their adversaries. They were plain spoken in how they felt, and yet they gave dignity to the other side. They gave dignity that had the respect of cases in mediation, respect in front of judges that saw this, and respect in front of juries. And I'm going to talk more about them in a second. But I want to go back for a minute to the person I wrote the book about Howard Baker. And you notice the title of the book is "The Other Fellow May Be Right." And let me tell you where that title came from. Many years ago, when I was serving as president of the Tennessee Bar Association, we had a seminar in Nashville, Tennessee. And we had a panel of outstanding lawyers at this seminar. Among them were Jim Neal, one of the great trial lawyers in America, Judge Sissy Daughtry, the first female member of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, Judge Bernice Donald, a great leader in the of our profession, and the leader in the American Bar Association, also now on the Sixth Circuit. And we had Senator Howard Baker. I was the moderator for the program. And I asked a question that day, and I never expected the answer I got, but I've never forgotten. I asked the panel, what is it about our legal system that is unique and that makes it great? And Howard Baker said the following. He said, you know, our system is contentious. It's contentious, particularly if you're a trial lawyer. There are winners and there are losers. It's a battle. We are in what Teddy Roosevelt called the arena, not in the great twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. We are in the arena. But then Howard Baker said this, but I've always remembered in my years as a trial lawyer, in my years as an advocate, in my years in the United States Senate, in my years in the White House with Ronald Reagan, in my years as an ambassador, I've always tried to remember something my father used to tell me when I was a boy. He said, Howard, please remember the other fellow may be right. Now think about that for a second. Howard Baker was a conservative, a Republican, the first Republican elected to the United States Senate from Tennessee ever, and popularly elected. And Howard Baker was deeply committed to a certain number of principles. But Howard Baker was always remembering and keeping in mind, first as a trial lawyer, and after that as a senator, as a politician, as a White House chief of staff to the President of the United States. You have to listen to the other side. The other side may be right. And even if you conclude that they are not right, you have to show respect for their points of view. The other lawyer may be right. And you have to reflect, Howard Baker felt. He said the essence of leadership is to be an effective listener, to listen to people, show respect, maybe at the end of that conversation say, you know, we're just not going to agree. We're going to agree to disagree on this. And Howard Baker lived that in his life as a lawyer first, and then in his life in the law, in the broader sense of law, political law, in the law in the United States Congress and in the White House and on the international scene. So I'm going to keep coming back to this exemplar of civility in the great Howard Baker and how he did things and what we can learn from it. I want to start with this. This is very important. Civility is a cornerstone concept of democracy. Okay? We have to have civility in order for the unique American experience to succeed. We are not a nation with an oligarchy, autocrats, telling us how we're supposed to believe on the issues. In fact, our entire republic was built on the notion of very different points of view in a Jeffersonian democracy competing, but with a respect for other points of view. It is a cornerstone concept of democracy. And if we don't have that cornerstone concept, if we do not have that understanding, then democracy can't flourish in that. If there's not an understanding, I'll give you a perfect example, I think, of what's going on today, and that's in Washington, D.C., where we have two sides that have very little respect for each other, aren't willing to work with each other. And consequently, we just have a situation where things are not getting done because both sides want to win. And both sides want to win by persuading the public that the other side is not just flat wrong, they don't love our country. They're not patriotic. They're not one of us. And we see that on both sides of the aisle in Congress. Let me tell you, get back to Howard Baker again, a story about him when he was majority leader of the United States Senate. In 1977, Howard Baker, 10 years into his service in the United States Senate, was elected minority leader of the United States Senate. The same day he was elected minority leader, in January of 1977, Bob Byrd of West Virginia was elected majority leader. Now, Howard Baker and Bob Byrd could not have been more different. Howard Baker was a fiscal conservative. Howard Baker believed in limited government, okay? Bob Byrd was known in West Virginia as the king of port. He would deliver the projects there. He liked to spend money on projects that were great for his home state of West Virginia. Bob Byrd and Howard Baker could not have been more different. But when Howard Baker became minority leader of the United States Senate, and Bob Byrd became majority leader, by the way, 3 years later they flipped roles when the Republicans took control of the Senate, and Howard Baker then became majority leader, and Bob Byrd became minority leader. But in the first week of January of 1977, when Howard Baker became the minority leader, he thought a lot about Bob Byrd. He liked Bob Byrd. He tried to get along with Bob Byrd. They had come into the Senate together in 1967, 10 years earlier. And Howard Baker, with his strategic civility, wanted to figure out a way he could work with this opponent. Not that they would agree on everything, they disagreed on many things, but could they find some common areas of agreement? And Howard Baker remembered something about Bob Byrd. He remembered when they were both freshman senators in 1967. Bob Byrd said to him at their very first meeting, "Wow, you're from Tennessee. Let me tell you something. my dream my entire life has been to play the fiddle at the Grand Ole Opry at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. See, Bob Byrd played the fiddle all of his life, and he would campaign. He'd go around the state of West Virginia. He'd make a speech, then he'd play the fiddle. And very popular as a politician with this musical ability. Howard Baker remembered this. And so, the first week that Howard Baker was Minority Leader of the United States Senate, he called one of his constituents back in Tennessee. He called Roy Acuff. Now, I don't know how many of you are country music fans. You know, Ken Burns is having a wonderful series on PBS now about the history of country music. But Roy Acuff was a legendary figure at the Grand Ole Opry. And Howard Baker called Roy Acuff, and he said, Roy, I have a favor to ask of you. Now, by the way, people who practice strategic civility, this is a very important point, whether in lawyering or otherwise, they ask people for favors, okay? It's not the situation. The uncivil approach is, I know what to do. I don't need your help because you need me. You know, I don't need you. You need me. So Howard Baker practiced strategic civility where he would ask people if they would do something for him or for his client or someone. So he called Roy Acuff and he said, Roy, I have a favor to ask you. And Roy Acuff said, Senator, what do you need? He said, Bob Byrd of West Virginia, who is the Senate Majority Leader, his dream all of his life has been to play the fiddle at the Grand Ole Opry. Could you get Bob Byrd a set at the Grand Ole Opry? Roy Acuff said, Senator, can you come down here Saturday night? We'll put him on the very first set. Yeah, it actually said first. He said, can he play the fiddle? And Howard Baker said, I don't know. I've never heard him play. I have no idea. He said, but can you get him on? He said, we'll get him on the first set. Howard Baker then walked down the halls of the Senate office, and he walked to Taj Mahal. Any of you familiar with Lyndon Johnson knows that when Lyndon Johnson was the Senate Majority Leader in the 1950s, he built a Majority Leader's office that was so wonderful, so huge, that they called it Taj Mahal. Howard Baker walked down to Taj Mahal, went into Senator Bob Byrd's office and said, Bob, Saturday afternoon, we got to fly down to Nashville. And Bob said, well, why are we doing that? He said, because Saturday night you're playing at the Grand Ole Opry. Now, let me tell you something. Howard Baker took Bob Byrd down to the Grand Ole Opry. Roy Acuff introduced Bob Byrd. Bob Byrd played the fiddle. I don't know how he played it, but he played the fiddle. From that moment on, liberal Democrat Bob Byrd of West Virginia adored conservative Republican Howard Baker of Tennessee. Did they agree on everything? No. But even when they disagreed, they were always agreeable. They started the tradition that I wish Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell would do. They opened every day the Senate was in session. They would meet each other. They would walk down the halls of Congress together, go through the doors into the well of the United States Senate, walk down the aisle side by side, stand in front and shake hands to open up the United States Senate. It was strategic civility, something that Howard Baker had done in his years as a lawyer. It's something he had done. He never, in his entire political career, he never ran a negative ad, never criticized his opponents in races. In fact, when he ran against Tennessee Governor Frank Clement in 1966, he told everybody he thought Frank Clement was a fine man. And that kind of civility took him a long, long way in life. So civility is a cornerstone concept of democracy. But here's something even more important. Civility is a cornerstone of our legal system. Now, this is very important because you and I both know that our legal system is contentious, right? For 40 years, I was a trial lawyer. I like to tell people I wasn't a litigator. I was a trial lawyer. I tried over 100 jury trials. And you know what they were? They were fights. They were fights. Wonderfully civil fights for the most part. There was going to be a winner and there was going to be a loser. It is a contentious profession. And yet it's very important to note that civility is a cornerstone concept of this profession, of our legal system. And if we don't have civility, then the system is not going to work. Now let me go back to Howard Baker, and I want to read to you something from my book that Howard Baker said many years ago about our legal system. He was asked to define a phrase that you and I hear a lot of over the years. And that phrase is the rule of law. We very proudly say as lawyers, we live in a country that's all about the rule of law, right? But how many people define what the rule of law means? Well, Howard Baker did. In a 2005 television interview, Howard Baker was actually asked by the interviewer to describe what the rule of law is. And this is what he said. The rule of law is an interesting phrase. I don't think it's ever really been defined with exactitude. But to me, the law is the lattice work that civilization uses for ordering people's relationship with each other and to govern their conduct. That is the law. The law is not statutes. The law is not precedents. It's not even Supreme Court decisions or any other court's decision. The law is an accumulation of the determination of mankind to find ways to get along, to respect each other, to have a decent respect for different points of view, and to translate disagreement into some sort of resolution. That's what the law is. And without the law, we would not have civilization. Let me return to that beautiful reference he makes. The lattice work of civilization. You see, all of us who practice law know that ultimately the law is about human relationships. And if you're a trial lawyer, as I was for 40 years, it's more often than not about relationships that have fallen apart, whether it's a couple in a divorce, whether it's a business that has failed, whether it is a claim that somebody has been injured due to the negligence of someone else. It's a breakdown in relationships. And so how in the world can we say that civility is an important concept in the cornerstone of our legal system? Well, again, we need to return to what civility means. Civility does not mean agreeing all the time with everybody. Civility is not weakness. Civility is often disagreeing. And yet, the really strong lawyers, the great trial lawyers, the great corporate lawyers, the great lawyers like Howard Baker, have known that civility, that conducting themselves with civility, is the best way to either get a conflict resolved favorably for your client, or to win if you have to get a case resolved by a judge or by a jury. It is an important cornerstone of our legal system. This is a great quote from Chief Justice Warren Burger many years ago. And this is something that he stated over a generation ago. Someone must teach that good manners, disciplined behavior, and civility, by whatever name, are the lubricants that prevent lawsuits from turning into combat. More than that, civility is really the very glue that keeps an organized society from flying to pieces. We've seen trials, I've seen trials in my lifetime that are not civil. And by that I mean attacks on the other side, attacks on witnesses, very uncivil attacks, trying to inflame the passions of the jury one way or another. And yet the really good trial lawyers I've seen in my lifetime know how to tell the truth, in a way that judges respect, that juries respect, that can often lead to a resolution of a conflict. I'm an old lawyer, so I tell war stories. A few years ago, I was defending a doctor in a rural part of Tennessee, about 60 miles north of my hometown of Memphis. It was what we used to call a medical malpractice case, but that seems so harsh. We now call it healthcare liability in Tennessee. And I was defending him, and he was being sued by a very good friend of mine, somebody I tried many cases with over the years. My adversary wanted to take my doctor's deposition, and he was willing to go up to the little town north of Memphis to take his deposition. And so I set it up with the doctor. We set it up. And then the plaintiff's lawyer called me and said, "Can I ride with you up to the deposition?" I said, "Sure." I went by his house that morning. I picked him up. I took him to the deposition. We had a deposition. We had a few objections, things back and forth. Both spoke kind of strongly at times about the situation. And then the deposition ended. We all shook hands, and I was starting to leave. I can't get into attorney-client matters here, but my doctor had sensed what happened, and he asked me, he said, "Did you give him a ride up here?" Yes, I did. And I'm giving a ride back. Now, without getting into attorney-client matters, my doctor wasn't happy that I was driving his adversary up there. And again, I will not be specific about what I said. Basically, I told him in so many words. I said, let me tell you something. We want this lawyer to drop this case. We wanted him to take what is called a voluntary non-suit or even a dismissal with prejudice. And I think we can do it. And on the road back to Memphis, I'm going to talk to him about that. And on the road back to Memphis, not that I'm Perry Mason or anybody who wins all the time, by the time we got back to Memphis, Tennessee, my adversary had agreed to sign an order of dismissal. I could have gotten in his face. I could have told him that his lawsuit was frivolous. I could have told him I was going to pursue Rule 11 sanctions. Instead, I drove him up to the deposition. We told jokes along the way. We talked about cases he had won and I had lost, and cases I'd won and he had lost. And when the day was over, that case was gone. That case was gone. Again, I'm not holding myself up as a great role model, but I think I practiced some Howard Baker strategic civility, and that good manners, disciplined behavior, and civility prevented this thing from turning into combat in a courtroom and helped us resolve the situation. Obviously, civility is an ethical obligation. I know it's an aspirational ethical obligation, but it is an ethical obligation. I have pictured here, of course, the great Atticus Finch, Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch. You know, the American Film Institute a few years ago did a survey, not of lawyers, but moviegoers across America, to ask who was the most heroic figure in the history of American films. Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch won overwhelmingly. Okay, and if you read To Kill a Mockingbird, if you see the movie, if you've been lucky enough to go to the Broadway play and see Jeff Daniels in his new portrayal of Atticus Finch, one thing that comes through on this is the civility of Atticus Finch. Now, by civility, was he weak? No. He spoke for Tom Robinson. He spoke very clearly to the jury in the defense of Tom Robinson. He was courageous in his advocacy. He told Scout that courage is when you know you're going to lose and you take on the task anyway. He had an uphill battle, and ultimately justice sadly did not prevail. But he inspired millions of us who watched the film, who had read the book, and he had civility. He was courageous in his advocacy. He actually told Scout, he said, you'll never really understand a person until you get in their skin, until you walk in their shoes. A great lawyer who practiced civility. Now, I want to commit, I'm not going to go into all the ethical situations because I want to really talk about what I call, get back to strategic civility, okay? But clearly, even though most of our ethical obligations, I got Perry Mason up there pretty quickly, I didn't get that point yet. Most of our ethical obligations are aspirational in character rather than a subject of disciplinary proceedings. The fact of the matter is, increasingly in recent years, judges have imposed sanctions for misbehavior in their courtroom. Sanctions for misbehavior, a lack of civility that does not show respect for the legal system, that undermines the confidence in the legal system. I want to commend to you the guidelines for civility that the litigation section has produced, the guidelines for conduct, that the ABA Fund for Justice and Education produced a few years back. You can find them, I found them on the web, you can find them on the litigation website. And that really provides a lot of the ethical guidelines. But you know, it's like somebody once said about good poetry. Good poetry tells us what we already know, but we just didn't realize it. A good poem will tell us something, and you always go, yeah, you know, that's right. I think by and large, we know how we should treat each other as lawyers. We know how we should treat judges. We know how we should treat our adversaries. We know how we should show respect. But I commend to you the guidelines for conduct. Most bar associations, local bars, have their own guidelines. The Memphis Bar, we have the guidelines for professional conduct, and I commend that to you. But let's get back to what was the line from Saturday Night Live about President George Bush? let's get back to strategery, okay? Why is it that civility is, strategic civility, is not just the ethical thing to do, not just the thing that we know, the way we ought to be practicing. It is the smart thing to do. Because, as I showed here on this slide, nice lawyers don't finish last. Leo DeRocher, I hope it's not true about baseball, but if nice baseball players finish last, it's not true about nice lawyers. Nice lawyers tend to prevail. I'll tell you why in a moment. Of course, this is the great Perry Mason, the first lawyer I ever met in my life. I grew up my father was a minister. I never met a lawyer until I was in college, and I needed a lawyer when I was in college. That's another story that I'm not going to talk about today. But this is the first lawyer I ever met, Perry Mason. I met him when I was 6 years old. He came into our house one night, black and white, small little TV screen about the size of this picture. He had two qualities that in 40 years of law practice, I've never seen again. Number one, he always won. And number two, he always represented innocent clients. He was supposed to win. He was a tremendous lawyer. He didn't believe in the reasonable doubt defense. He always won his criminal cases by proving in a murder trial that his client was innocent, by proving who the real killer was. And interestingly enough, the real killer always came to the trial for some reason in the courtroom, and Perry exposed him. But nice lawyers do not finish last, and let me tell you why. Well, let me start with this great quote, one of my favorite lawyer movies. This is from the movie A Civil Action. John Travolta played the plaintiff's lawyer. Robert Duvall played Jerome Thatcher in A Civil Action, and he was the defense lawyer. And this is the best line of the film, and a line that over the years I have constantly, when young lawyers I worked with, when I was trying to help them learn the ropes about being a trial lawyer, I've referenced this line. The single greatest liability a lawyer can have is pride. Pride has lost more cases than lousy evidence, idiot witnesses, and a hanging judge all put together. There is absolutely no place in a courtroom for pride. Now, what does that mean? Most of the incivility I have witnessed in my life as a lawyer have been by insecure lawyers who are fighting for their pride. They want to show just how tough they are. They want to show they're not going to be pushed around. They want to show that they're really, let's be blunt about it, they want to show they're damn good lawyers. That's what they want to impress the jury on. That's what they want to impress the judge on. That's not a matter of skill. That's a matter of their pride. And let me tell you this. The best lawyers I've ever seen in a courtroom, and I've been blessed to see a lot, the best lawyers I've ever seen do not fall into the trap of pride. They are courageous advocates for their clients, but they don't strut like peacocks. They are very strong in their advocacy, and they show respect for the court. They show respect for the other side. They show respect for the process. I've talked to over 100 juries in my career. I've talked to them after trials about about how they reached their result. And without exception, every one of them, whether I've won or lost, has told me how much they respected the process. And they want to see lawyers who respect the process as well. Let's start with this. There's L. Wood. Let's start with this. Why is civility important for the practice of law? Why is strategic civility important? That's because judges like nice lawyers. Now, what I mean again about a nice lawyer, not a lawyer just capitulate to the other side. Judges want you to be advocates for your clients. But judges respect lawyers who show respect in that process, show respect for the court and respect for the other side. You know, from a strategic standpoint, whenever I was in a bench trial or a motion hearing in front of a judge and my adversary started attacking me personally, I thought that was working to my advantage, and I did not snap back. I would try to say respectfully, no, Your Honor, that point is incorrect, and just say it. I wouldn't say I resented it. I wouldn't say that. You know, the very first court appearance I made in my life as a young lawyer in 1978, my senior partner allowed me to argue a motion because he knew I was going to lose it, okay? That's why he didn't argue the motion. And he told me after I lost the motion, he said, this was a very important day for you. And the reason it was important was Judge Cady met you today. He did not rule in your favor, but he reached an impression about you. And that impression is going to be his impression of you. And every time you appear in front of him in the future, you want to have credibility with him by the way you interact, by the respect that you show. He was telling me that day that judges like civil lawyers. Again, it doesn't mean you have to capitulate. It doesn't mean you don't speak out, but you speak out with great respect. Now, this is more important. That's my cousin Benny, my favorite trial lawyer. Okay. Juries like nice lawyers. This is extremely important. Okay. I love jury trials. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite quotes is from one of my favorite comedians, the late George Burns. I wish I had the cigar. I guess I could do it with a pen. He always had a cigar. And he once said, I was married by a judge. I should have asked for a jury. Juries, I love trying cases in front of juries, okay? I love the common sense of juries. I love the way they reach their result. You know, I would talk to juries afterwards, and, you know, it could be a very humbling experience because if a lot of times when I won, I thought, boy, I tell you, I know why I won this case. And then they would give me their explanation on why I won. And it had nothing to do with anything I said. Nothing. I mean, an argument that I had never thought of. Sometimes arguments that had not even been advanced. Okay? But let me tell you one thing I did learn. Juries like lawyers who are nice. Juries like lawyers who are civil. I've had many juries tell me over the years at the end of a trial, they couldn't stand that other lawyer. He was mean. He was arrogant. He was condescending. They didn't like him. They didn't like him. And when I was in trials and my adversary began to get downright dirty and attack me, I didn't go object to the judge and say it was inappropriate or whatever. You know what? I sat there because I could tell the jury was not going to like it. Now, again, I'm not holding myself up as some great role model because anybody who ever saw me try a case knows that I think I was a forceful advocate. But let me tell you a few things I never said in over 100 jury trials in 40 years. I never used the word liar. I never said my opponent is lying. I never even said an adverse witness was lying when I caught them not telling the truth. Here's what I did. I civilly questioned their credibility. I would say, you know, Mr. So-and-so said this, you know, and, you know, it just doesn't square with the facts that we've heard in this case. Now, here's what you want. We all know this. What we want the word liar to be used, but not by us. We want a juror to go back in that jury room and say, boy, that guy was lying. He was lying through his teeth, okay? And the best way that's going to happen is for you and I not to call them liars, okay? Because that just gets people defensive. That makes witnesses sympathetic. When there's an arrogant lawyer attacking a witness, that makes the witness look like a sympathetic figure. But when the witness is being horsey and you're being respectful but still bringing out the truth, that is civil strategery. That is a strategic civil lawyer. And again, juries like nice lawyers. And that's the way we get favorable jury verdicts. One of the things, and again, I'm not trying to hold myself up as a great role model, but when I was on the defense side, and about 90% of the time I was on the defense side, and if my adversary tried to portray my client as being a bad person, being dishonest, you know, a trial where one side is good, the other side is evil, I like to stand up in closing. Now, matter of fact, let me just say this: as trial lawyers know, the closing argument is about it's only important in movies. You seldom win anything at a closing argument to a jury. But I like to stand up in front of a jury and say, I'll be very brief and say, you know, when I heard Mr. So-and-so, my adversary, talking about my client and saying these things, and saying, you know, it occurred to me, you know, he's trying to make this like a movie where there's good guys and bad guys. I don't think there are bad people in this courtroom. I don't. I think the plaintiff is very sincere in her belief that, and she was sincere in bringing this lawsuit. She believes, et cetera, et cetera. I think respectfully, that's not supported by the facts of the matter, but I don't think it's a bad person. Now, sometimes I had to say this was not necessarily a good person, but I tried to avoid that. Again, juries like nice lawyers. It is strategic civility or strategery. Oops. Lawyers like nice lawyers. Let's face it. Most of the conflicts that we find ourselves in a legal world never go to court. They are conflicts in which we are dealing with our adversaries. And to the extent that we can be civil with our adversaries, we can be friendly with our adversaries, we can break bread with our adversaries, have drinks with our adversaries, show them respect, it's more likely that we're going to achieve a result favorable to our client, because lawyers like nice lawyers. On the other hand, if your interaction with opposing counsel is to call them up and tell them, you know, I'll tell you this, you're in Rule 11 territory. I'm going to take you down. We're gonna regret this. You may lose your license in this whole process. We've all had people make those kind of accusations. You know, when that happens, it does not lead to any resolution of the conflict. It does not in any way do that. Lawyers like nice lawyers. And so much of what we do, civility is a cornerstone concept of what we do. Because for the most part, we're trying not to go to court. It's like medicine. Sometimes you have to have surgery, but you don't want them to cut on you unless they really have no other option than to cut them. And the same is true for trials, and the same is true for resolving conflicts with big fights rather than an effort to reach resolution. Lawyers like nice lawyers. I want to close with an image. Oops. I want to close with this image. Y'all recognize these two individuals. One that's no longer with us, one that is fortunately still with us. The left is Antonin Scalia. Antonin Scalia was, of course, one of the most conservative jurists in the history of American jurisprudence. Whether you agreed or disagreed with his opinions, there is no question of the fact that he was a brilliant legal mind, a brilliant scholar. And his influence on the court in the past generation was overwhelming. To his right, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, still in the court, probably the most liberal member of the United States Supreme Court, and has been during her remarkable career. Now, look at this picture. These are two jurists on the United States Supreme Court. Two people of extremely different legal viewpoints. And you know what? They were best friends. They were not just colleagues on the bench. If you asked Tony Scalia who his best friend was, he would say Ruth Ginsburg. And if you asked the notorious RBG who her best friend was, she would say Tony Scalia. They rang in New Year's Eve and a New Year each year with their spouses together, the four of them, the Ginsburgs and the Scalias, having dinner together. They traveled the world together. Tony Scalia once said, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has made me a better judge. Ruth Bader Ginsburg laughed and said, Antonin Scalia has made me a better judge. I actually think this picture exemplifies what our profession should be about. Vigorous disagreement, and yet conducting in a manner that promotes our legal system, promotes our respect for law, promotes the rule of law as a lattice work for the relationships in our society. It actually makes not just our profession better, but our nation better. So I close with the words of the great lawyer, Tennessee lawyer Howard Baker. Fight for what you believe in, but always remember, the other person may be wrong. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions or listen to any comments.
Bill, this is Jason. I'm back on, and really appreciate you coming out and spending the time with us today and giving your presentation on Howard Baker. I've been monitoring the chat window. Don't see any questions currently up, although people are encouraged to submit questions that I'd be happy to pass along to Bill. I have one, Bill, if you don't mind me asking. And it kind of relates specifically to, you started this talk out speaking about politics and the importance of, well, the fact that we have basically an uncivil atmosphere in our political arena today. And I guess I'd want to know, you told the story about the doctor who was upset that initially that you were going to give opposing counsel a ride back in your car until one-on-one you could explain to him the strategery, as you say, of that civility. What would you say to people in the political arena who would say, you know, being uncivil is more entertaining? It's what people tune in to see. It's what gets your name out there and gets you popular and gets attention paid towards you. Nobody tunes in to see politicians acting civilly towards each other.
Jason, that's an excellent point. And I think we have to start not with what we're asking the politicians to do, but what we're asking ourselves as voters to do, okay? I'm very serious about that. You know, when people come to me and ask me for their support, whether they're running for city council or governor or whatever, I say, well, tell me what your approach is to solving a problem. I don't ask them what their approach is to a specific issue. Although I feel very strongly about some issues, I try not to say, if you don't support my position on such and such, you're never going to get my vote. There was a great Tennessee lawyer named Louis Donaldson. Louis Donaldson was the Donaldson of Baker Donaldson, so he was Howard Baker's law partner. And I heard Louis say many years ago at a leadership conference, he said, never vote for someone who you agree with everything they say. And he said, you know, if you played on a sports team, if you played for a coach and the coach came out first day of practice and said, you know, we're not going to have to work very hard on this. It's going to be easy and we're just going to have a great time. If you had a minister who didn't just practice preaching grace and love, but challenge us all to try to strive to be better, even though we're not perfect creatures. He said, you wouldn't support these. He said, but for some reason in politics, we just want somebody who tells us everything we agree with. And if we disagree with any of them, we're just going to say, you will never have my vote. You will never have my support. So I really think it starts with us. I think it starts with us. And, you know, again, I don't know. I think it's going to be hard to get it back to civility. But to the extent we can encourage our leaders to really practice it and indicate to them that we really want to see efforts to work. You know, all the polls show that the American people don't like negative campaigns. They're like, but of course, the polls aren't accurate because they're running those ads for a reason.
Right.
They're running them because apparently they are effective. But you know, I like asking how people will work together, indicating to them that whether you're Republican, please tell me how you're going to work with Democrats. If you're a Democrat, tell me how you're going to work with Republicans. That's about the best I can do right now.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot to solve our nation's political woes today.
Right.
So I'll open it up to any additional questions that may be out there. I am not seeing any in the chat room right now. Bill, we appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate everybody who tuned in. Hope you enjoyed the program. I commend you to Bill's works. He is especially the particular book that he's been speaking about today about Howard Baker. And I also commend you, those listening, to hold November 19th on your calendar. We'll have another 21st Century Lawyer program that date with details forthcoming. Bill, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
I've enjoyed being with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.